Thank you, Marilyn, so much. Where'd you go?
Right here.
Oh, there you go. When Marilyn called, she said, I'd like to invite you to come to Santa Fe, and then she went on and on and on, and I finally had to interrupt her, and I said, Marilyn, you had me at Santa Fe. Linda, where are you? Thank you so much, and thank you all, members of the board and supporters of the station. All these operations are so important and live on a shoestring, so the contributions you have made, not just tonight, but by being faithful fundraisers and friends and marketers for the station, I know how important it is. And when I did a little poking around, because I didn't know the station, and I read that after a court case was decided last spring, Linda had a statement. The case allowed political advertising to appear on public stations. And Linda said, we pledge to resist any effort or pressure that conceivably could force us to open our airwaves to attack ads. And I thought, I'm home. This is it. And Craig, thank you so much. Craig and I met for the first time on the air. I was a guest on his show, and I was thrilled to be able to do that. Marilyn has been telling me about your show and about you for a long time, so it's great to be here tonight with you and to have a chance to have the conversation with you. A couple of friends of mine are here. I just wanted to introduce them. John and Linda Massapust, my hosts, are dear friends who came here from Minneapolis, and like so many people in the short time I've been here, decided on a dime in one day, okay, this is where we're going to live. And today they took this Flatlander to the Borrego Trail to humiliate me. And I did okay. I did okay. But if I sink slowly during my comments, you'll understand why. And Joanne Ash and Tom Ash over there have come from near Albuquerque. And Joanne in particular, I'm thrilled to have here because she is a partner of mine in one of my projects at the Norman Lear Center at USC. It's called Journeys in Film. And if you look at journeysinfilm.org, you'll see about an effort to help American kids become global citizens. And in a time of xenophobia, it's an amazing effort, and the focus is on middle school kids to catch them while they're still developing, and the way in which it's done is to use foreign films with young kids as the protagonists in order to engage them and to help teachers teach from those films. And so it's an amazing project. And you'll not be shocked to know we're also raising money for it. So I wanted to start with a question. Do you feel overwhelmed by the amount of information bombarding you? I find that it's a common experience, and it's not an accident. These statistics are amazing. Every 2 days, we create as much information as we did in the history of the world until 2003. Imagine every 2 days that happens. Every 2 years, the world's information doubles. That now happens. And no wonder this has been called the age of big data. That's what's out there. And to kind of try to put your arms around it, the person who I find most useful in this is a Nobel Prize winning economist from MIT named Herb Simon. He won the prize in 78. And he said in 1970 something really interesting about all this information. He said, information consumes the attention of its recipients. Very interesting way of thinking, that attention is the key. Information consumes the attention of its recipients. And therefore, a wealth of information, which is what we have, creates a poverty of attention. So we live in that poverty. And what we have to do is to allocate that attention. And we have to decide, try to decide what to pay attention to. But the problem is that there is not an infinite amount of attention. It is a zero-sum game. People talk about multitasking. It does not exist. It's a nice shorthand, but scientists have found that at best people can oscillate back and forth between different tasks. We have nervous systems. We take in information through our nervous systems, and that is our bandwidth. Just as you try to upgrade your computer or get a faster internet service provider. Our bandwidth, our nervous system it's measured in bits per second, is 110 bits per second. Listening to me now takes up 60 bits per second. If you're at a party and you're having a conversation, you hear another conversation, that's 2 times 60. It's just beyond what you can do. But beyond that, it's impossible. So we have limited attention. So how do we allocate our attention? 2 different ways. One, and 2 different systems of the brain, actually physiologically 2 different ways. One is called various things. It's called top-down attention, or the executive function. It's voluntary, it's rational, it's conscious. We decide what to pay attention to. And the parts of the brain that control that are the anterior cingulate cortex, the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, and the thalamus. And on the non-existent slide right there, I am showing you where those parts of the brain are. The other attention is bottom up. It's involuntary attention. It's unconscious. We pay attention to some things whether we want to or not. It gets us to pay attention. So you have both these systems. In that case, the limbic system and the amygdala are the ones who run that. We have nothing to do with how it's working. It's just working the way it worked when we were roaming the savannah 20,000 years ago. So it makes sense that the power to occupy our attention is valuable. It's a commodity. How can you get someone's attention? So what has the power to occupy our attention, to captivate us, to get us to pay attention whether we want to or not? And a lot of this comes from thinking about what we were like when we were roaming the savannah. Well, danger. Anything that makes you afraid will get your attention. Sex gets your attention. Desire. Novelty, change. You would be dead if you didn't notice something new. Do you ever notice in the supermarket every other product says new on it? Because we can't not jerk our heads toward it. It's built into us. Play. We love to play. We're the creatures who play. And we love every aspect of being played with. We can't pass up an opportunity. We love illusion and that sort of thing. And most important to me, story. We are, unlike animals, creatures who, if we hear once upon a time, we want to know what happens next. We can't help it. We are narrative-based creatures. So all those things, among others, are able easily to get us to pay attention to something. So here, pop quiz. What's the word in the dictionary for something with the power to occupy our attention? Well, if you had a reverse Oxford English dictionary, you would find that the definition of the power to occupy our attention is entertainment. That's what it means. The root of it, tenir in the attainment, is the word for to grab or to hold. And what's being grabbed or held is our attention. So the power to occupy our attention is valuable. We know that. And it's valuable in 2 ways. First, it's economic power. It's honest to God economic power. You notice the expression, we pay attention. In industries, our attention is monetized. Our attention has a price. Our eyeballs are bought and sold by industries. The entertainment industry, that's what it does. The advertising industry, that's what it's all about. Plato was very interested in this. He wanted to understand how entertainment worked, although he called it poetry, because in ancient Greece, the poets were the rock stars of the time. They would have competitions. 10,000 people would show up at arenas to hear different poets perform Homer. And so he explained that the reason poetry, entertainment, is so powerful is that it bypasses our reason. It completely end runs our judgment. It does an appeal to the bottom up, we can't help it, part of our attention. It gets our emotions, our instincts, our desires. We are bedazzled, almost literally, by entertainment. One of my favorite examples is drug ads on television. And you've probably seen a bunch of them. One for restless leg syndrome, another for Cymbalta, and it's true for lots of others too. What happens, and I'm sure you have this experience, is you're watching the ad, and it's an interesting story, and these people, and they're doing what they're doing, and then they take this drug, and it's great. And then on comes a narrator who for 30 seconds says, it will make you homicidal. It can make you be a compulsive gambler, honest to God. That's a side effect of Cymbalta. And on and on and on. And you wonder, why would anyone in their right mind take this drug? And the answer is, we're not in our right minds. We are being captivated by these pictures and the music and the images. Music, pictures, and stories trump our reason. It's the part of our brain, and that's why they do it, to grab our attention. So Plato said that the power to occupy attention is political power, an interesting idea. He set up in the Republic to create an ideal state. And so he had to decide what the curriculum should be and who should be in it and so on. And he got to the question of, should poets be in the ideal state? And he said, well, look what poetry does. I'm quoting him now. It waters and fosters the emotions of sex and anger and all the appetites of our souls. So if poets were in the ideal, in the kingdom, pleasure and pain would be lords of your city instead of law and reason. And so famously in Book 10, he says, banish them. You can't deal with it. You can't argue with poetry. You can't say, don't pay attention. It's magic. You have to banish them. So he created an authoritarian state in order to do that. So the Romans, of course, thought the fact that entertainment could be useful this way was terrific. Bread and circuses. Gladiators, that's what you do. That's how you control people, by giving them that. And interestingly, there's a debate going on right now that illustrates this. The movie Zero Dark 30. It's all, there's a big fight about, I mean, many things, but the central focus is, does it say that torture is effective? And you have to ask yourself, who cares? And then the answer is, because people who see it think it's true. That's what happens when something is in entertainment. There was a series called 24, I don't know if any of you saw it, and famously there were sequences in which people were tortured and intelligence came from that, and it was so effective at saying that torture is a good way to get information that the dean of West Point had to go to Los Angeles and meet with the writers and producers of 24 to say, please stop this. Our cadets believe you and not their teachers and not their textbooks. So this stuff is black magic. It's really powerful. So if you add it up, the political power of captivating our attention, of bedazzling us with story and emotion, and the price of capturing attention, what that equals is the $6 billion campaign of 2012. $6 billion. You remember Deep Throat, Follow the Money? Okay, so let's follow the money. And I want to start with, where does it go? We'll talk about where it comes from and who benefits from them, but where does $6 billion go? What is it spent on? Why is it needed? Well, about a third of it, about $2 billion, goes to buy big data and to buy what's called a ground game, an organization. and you put those two things together and you have a get out the vote operation, which is tremendously important. But 2/3 of it, $4 billion, buys attention. So talk about each of those. Big data for a second. Traditionally, data was things like the census and the voter rolls and who lives where. But now, with enormous ability, with high-speed computers and all the things that we do when we go online, we leave digital crumbs everywhere we go, and someone is watching all of that. And that stuff can be collected. I mean, the kinds of things that can be collected about us include all those set-top boxes when we're watching cable television. It has a second-by-second record of everything we ever see, when we fast forward, when we don't see something that we've recorded. And all the stuff that people do, anyone have an iPhone, you download an app, well, they're getting information about you in those apps, and until someone caught a few players like Google and Apple, they were getting your address book. They were getting your pictures. And all you did was click on and say, I want that. No one reads those terms of service. So big data is you all. You are making that up, and it's being crunched and sliced and diced in all kinds of different ways. So we can come back to that. I'm trying to rush through some stuff. Is big data good or bad? Well, maybe big data equals big democracy. And for example, if you're an Obama supporter, the way it is said that Obama finally got across the finish line is that his people were able to use all this data so that they could go after people and not only say, would you vote, have you voted, but they could say, on your block, these 30% of the people have voted, but you haven't, or 70%, and your record is down here. And so they entice people through social pressure. They used all this data brilliantly to organize, to fundraise, and to get people to go to the polls. Or is big data Big Brother? There was a book about it earlier this year called I Know What You Did. Siri, that voice thing, they keep all of that. They have everything you've ever said to Siri, and everything Siri has ever said to you is in Cupertino, California. Is big data good or bad? Well, big data can give us big choice. Recommendation engines. You go buy something on Amazon and it says people who bought this also bought that. I love that stuff because I'm interested. I didn't know about that. So it does give you choice. And a lot of younger people in particular like getting ads targeted to them. It's called behavioral advertising. So that if you do this stuff, then they'll send a message to you that you're interested in. Or is big data a big cheat? Because this is back to the issue of paying and monetizing. Everything that you do, say on Facebook or Twitter or whatever, all that stuff which you create doesn't belong to you. Someone else monetizes it. They sell it to advertisers and they get money for it and you get nothing for it. So maybe there's something unfair in all of that. So that's the big data part, the $2 billion. The $4 billion, where does it go? Buying our attention. It buys bottom-up attention. It tells us stories, it scares us, it arouses our desire, it promises change and something new, it plays with us. And the attention that it buys is attention that is mediated. It's on the media. The way we interact with politics, by and large, is through the media. 3/4 of our waking time is spent looking at screens of various kinds. So it is buying, we're there, and it's grabbing us with messages we may not want to pay attention to, but we are paying attention to. If you're running a campaign, media means two kinds of media: paid media and free media. Paid media is ads. In this last campaign, there were 1 million ads, most of them negative. Free media, also called earned media, is the news. The candidates want to get covered on the news. Let's talk about paid media for a moment. 85% of presidential TV ad spending goes to the owners of local TV stations. 85%. So that's where all this money is going, to the owners of local TV stations and the networks they're affiliated with. Most of the ads go around the news on local TV, which in many markets now is up to 5 hours a day. So that's where the political ads are placed. So if you want to follow the money, that's where the money goes. It's why candidates need money. The local TV stations, if you own a local TV station, it's like a license to print money. We, the public, own the electromagnetic spectrum, which is over which everything is broadcast, just like we own mineral rights or air or the oceans. We give to the owners of these stations a free license. They run their business because we have licensed a little piece of the spectrum to them. They promise to serve the public interest when they get the license. The problem is that the communication industry, including local television, has been deregulated. The public interest promise is not enforced. And believe it or not, if you want to know if you own a station and you have a license, how do you keep it, how do you justify it, deal with challenges, the way you keep a license is that every 8 years you fill out a postcard to the Federal Communication Commission and it says, please renew my license. And the answer is always yes. So they sell our spectrum to candidates to get our attention and to get our votes in order to have power to wield over us to do stuff like that. The top 10 affiliates of the 4 networks, so the biggest stations around the country, their profit was up 60% over the 2008 presidential cycle. That's what this does. There's so much money in it. The president of CBS, Les Moonves, said, super PACs may be bad for America, but they're very good for CBS. And if you're not ready to take strychnine already, I want to tell you that local news is the #1 source of information for most Americans. Yes. Yes, it used to be about 78%. It's declined into the 60s and the high 50s because of the internet, but it's still, if you ask Americans, where do they get their news? About politics, government, campaigns, issues, the answer is always, the #1 answer is local TV news. So what's on local TV news? I have a hunch this is not an audience big on watching a lot of local TV news. So I did a study. I've done a bunch of studies over the last dozen years about what's on local TV news around the country. We did recently the Los Angeles market, which is 4 counties. There are 8 stations that have news on them. We looked at every news broadcast in the course of 2 months, 24/7. We timed 19,000 segments and coded them. Imagine what that was like to do. And if you took all that data and compressed it into what is a typical half hour of local TV news. So the biggest segment, 8¼ minutes, is ads, which in a campaign season is political ads. There's also about 2 minutes of ads for itself. Stay tuned, you won't want to miss this. So that's already 10¼ minutes of a half hour. Then the remaining time is what's called the news hole. Well, sports and weather occupy the biggest part of that news hole, 20%, over 3½ minutes. And so after that, there's only about half of the half hour left. So here in order are the things that you find on local TV news after you do ads and sports and weather. The #1 topic, crime, exactly. Almost 3 minutes of crime. #2 is what you'd call soft, odd, or miscellaneous. The ugliest dog competition would be next. That's about 2.5 minutes. Then after that is entertainment. But I don't mean the business of entertainment, it's just soft, fluff, fun things. And so when you have done that, there's almost nothing left. And so, for example, the coverage this is the Los Angeles market, of the business and the economy of Los Angeles was 29 seconds. And how about coverage of the government of Los Angeles City and County? And I'm including in this government category budget, law enforcement, education, layoffs, new ordinances, voting procedures, personnel changes, healthcare, transportation, immigration, all of that, 22 seconds. So that's the #1 source of news for Americans, which is unbelievably profitable because it's a cash cow, because candidates are spending all that money to get our attention in those ads. And by the way, they don't cover the ads on television. They don't do the kind of fact checks you might imagine. There was a study during this last campaign of city markets in 5 swing states: Charlotte, Cleveland, Las Vegas, Tampa, and Milwaukee. And they looked to see, well, they're getting all this money from these ads. Aren't they reporting on them? Well, the answer is that 4 out of 5 of those markets had not one story that had anything to do with verifying or disputing anything in an ad. But they did have 53 segments about Justin Bieber. The one market that had anything about political ads was in Tampa. One story in the whole month. And they had a 3-minute story saying that ads paid for by the Koch brothers were false. But those ads aired 150 times on that station in this month. One 3-minute piece, 150 times the ads. How did it get this way? How did news move from being something that's in the public interest to a profit center? That is the #1 reason. #2, the deregulation of media, we talked about that. And #3, the deregulation of political money. So, the news as a profit center. In the 1980s, Don Hewitt, the producer of 60 Minutes, discovered that his show could make money. It was the first time the news program could make money. And from then on, news had to make money. It was put into the entertainment divisions of networks. Hewitt said, we started a trend and we ruined television because we made it possible to do this kind of thing. And so now, what is news? There are 2 ways of thinking about news. There's something called push and something called pull. Push news is when there is an editor or a publisher or a producer who says, this is important stuff, this is not so important. Here's what a citizen needs to know to be informed. And pull is all about the market, what people want to see, what grabs attention. That explains what the content of local news is. It's what people want, and as long as it's being pulled, it's going to be given to them. And it's not just local TV news, by the way. A favorite example, Time magazine earlier this year on its European cover had Mario Draghi, the head of the European Central Bank, and the headline was, "Can this man save Europe?" And that was also the front cover of Time in Asia and Time in South Pacific. So Time in the US that same week had a basset hound and a chihuahua. And it said, "Surprising science of animal friendships." And lest you think that this is not something, well, Time is fairly prestige press. The New York Times, if you go to their website, there is prominently displayed the most popular stories, the most emailed stories. And they do that because we're interested. We want to know what other people are doing. And every time we click on that, it makes them more popular. And they put them, a computer just puts them higher on the page. So that vicious or virtuous circle, depending on how you look at it, is something that we're all involved in. The deregulation of media happened most importantly during the second Reagan term. He had a commissioner of the Federal Communication Commission named Henry Fowler, and Henry Fowler said that a television is just like a toaster, but it's a toaster with pictures. And so there's no need for us to regulate its content. There's no need for local stations, as they had to for decades, to go out into their communities and say, what are you interested in? What should we have on the air? They got rid of that. And they got rid of the fairness doctrine. There's no need ever to be balanced or fair about anything. There's no need to run any news at all or choose among the content. There is no regulation except every once in a while on pornography. The deregulation of money is something that you all know about. There used to be something called McCain-Feingold, and well, Feingold's no longer in office, and John McCain is no longer John McCain. There was a decision that people don't pay attention to about super PACs. It was called Speech Now versus the Federal Election Commission, which eliminated contributions to independent political groups. So it almost doesn't matter what campaigns can raise because all these other groups are raising money. And then, of course, Citizens United made sure that corporations can be anonymous when they give. So we've looked at where the money goes. Where does the money come from? Well, it comes from the donor class. And much as I love you all, we're talking about a different class here. More than 80% of the money that was raised, of those billions, was given by 0.37% of the contributors to the election. And you know who they are. They're plutocrats and billionaires. They're the Sheldon Adelsteins and the Koch brothers and the Foster Frieses. They're the lobbyists for the big industries, corporations, and special interests. And they're the big sectors of the economy. Half of the donations come from finance, insurance, real estate, healthcare, communication, and energy. So what do they get for it? They are giving the money to the people who need the money in order to pay the local stations. So what do these special interests who give this money get in return for it? Well, just look at what has been happening. Wall Street, in the worst financial crisis in living memory, what kind of impact did that have? Well, Senator Dick Durbin of Illinois said, the banks are still the most powerful lobby on Capitol Hill, and they are dictating policy because, frankly, they own the place. And it's about this money that we're talking. Big Pharma, there was a shocking story about how Amgen, a pharmaceutical company, at the 11th hour when the fiscal cliff negotiation was happening, got a provision into it which costs the public $2 billion. It stops generic drugs being used for dialysis. And no one knew until the next day. That comes. That's what they're buying. Big energy, the way in which climate change is questionable science. It doesn't fall from the sky. This is something which is bought and paid for. There was a story in The Guardian this week. They discovered yet another source of money, something called the Donors Trust, $120 million going anonymously to more than 100 anti-climate change groups. What does big money buy? Well, it buys majorities. It buys power. Karl Rove pointed out that he who controls redistricting controls Congress. So leading up to the 2010 census, which is where redistricting comes from, leading up to it was a years-long Republican strategy of figuring out how to control the redistricting. There were groups that they were funded by tobacco companies, Walmart, Big Pharma, gave millions in order to create something called the Republican State Leadership Committee to work in all the states to figure out who would be redistricting. The Chamber of Commerce, American Crossroads, millions and millions. All told, in 2010, leading up to the census, $30 million. And as a result of spending that money, the Republicans picked up in state legislatures 675 seats, giving them complete control of 12 state legislatures. And once they had it, they could just redraw the lines. They could gerrymander. And so the redrawing of the lines happened 4 times as many for Republican congressional districts as for Democrats. The outcome is, you probably know this, that in 2012, the Democrats in the House won 1.2 million more House votes than the Republicans, 52% to 48%. But the Republican, and if that had matched what the number of seats in the House, the Democrats would have a majority, 234 Democrats, 201 Republicans. That's what, if the number of people who vote. On the other hand, I'm sorry, that it is 234 Republicans to 201 Democrats. It would have been 220 Democrats to 214 Republicans. So if I can impose on you for a moment, just keep going for a little bit, is democracy over? Democracies, politics, campaigns are story wars. They're battles of narratives. They're competing explanations of the world. They offer stories and myths of who we are, where we've been, and where we want to go. So in a democracy, the job of journalism is to cover and uncover those stories, to carry the narratives, to repeat them, to tell us what is being said, but also to give us context, to help us understand them, to help us decide whether to believe them, to weigh and measure and assess and analyze and fact check and search for truth. But what happens to democracy when media treat us as consumers, not as citizens? What happens to democracy when media define the public interest as what the public is interested in? What happens to democracy when news is just another profit center inside a big corporate conglomerate? When the standard for news isn't don't be wrong, but don't be boring? When the business model of journalism can't afford investigative reporting? What happens to democracy when news is Fox News? What happens to democracy when the purveyors of disinformation attack accuracy as bias? What happens when news loses its nerve? When journalism becomes not analysis, but stenography? When tell the facts is replaced by report the controversy? When fairness is redefined as false equivalence, phony balance? He said, she said, and we'll have to leave it there. What happens when opinions are as good as evidence? What happens to democracy when truth comes not from science, but from scripture? When, as Stephen Colbert might say, when truthiness is as good as truth? That's where we are now. And what you get when that happens is, for example, the House Science Committee, one of the top Republicans, is Paul Brown, a member of Congressman who's just, Georgia's announced he's now running for senator, and he could get elected. And here's a quote from his campaign, the most recent campaign. "All that stuff I was taught about evolution and embryology and the Big Bang Theory, all that is lies straight from the pit of hell." It's House Science Committee. Karl Rove said to a reporter in 2004 that guys like you, he said to the reporter, are in what we call the reality-based community. You believe that solutions emerge from your judicious study of discernible reality. That's not the way the world really works anymore. When we act, we create our own reality. So what is that like nowadays? You get Jack Welch, the former head of General Electric. In October, this past October, the Bureau of Labor Statistics said that unemployment went down. So Jack Welch takes to Twitter and says, "Unbelievable job numbers. These Chicago guys will do anything. Can't debate, so change numbers." So the most legitimate, long-time source of statistics, Jack Welch, who has real credibility, takes his opinion and says, well, it can't be right. It's wrong. It's just not true. They cook the numbers. You get people called the poll truthers. I suspect most of you know who Nate Silver is. Yeah. And so Nate Silver had the best predictions. When he showed Obama going down, the Obama people hated it. When he showed him going up, they enjoyed it. And so the opposition, led by a guy named Dean Chambers, started something called unskewed polls. Let's make our own polls. And in fact, he also, this is an attack that he launched on Nate Silver. Have you noticed that Nate Silver is thin and effeminate and has a soft-sounding voice that sounds exactly like the Mr. New Crustrati voice on Rush Limbaugh? They attacked Nate Silver, homophobic attacks, as if that were a way of delegitimizing his numbers. Jobs creators. You get propaganda is what happens. The terms like jobs creators. Don't you love that? Used to be rich people. Now it's jobs creators. The Congressional Research Service, a highly respected, nonpartisan outfit, was asked to investigate the impact of tax cuts on stimulating jobs. So in September, during the campaign, they put out their findings called Taxes and the Economy, an economic analysis of top tax rates since 1945. Okay, we'll know the answer. Here's what they said. Analysis of such data suggests that the reduction in the top tax rates have had little association with savings, investment, or productivity growth. However, the top tax rate reductions appear to be associated with the increasing concentration of income at the top of the income distribution. So they put this out, and 24 hours later, Mitch McConnell got them to scrub it off the internet. And the only reason we even know about this is that someone leaked the study to the New York Times. When these things happen, you get what's called access journalism. Reporters who care more about getting the next interview, the next booking on their show, than they care about telling us what's going on. When someone says the failed stimulus on Meet the Press, David Gregory does not intervene and say, wait a minute, it created 1 million jobs. You just keep going. Obama's apology tour, which never happened. Obama gut welfare reform, which never happened. Obama said you didn't build that. Obama outsourced Jeep jobs to China. So to counteract that, there are a whole bunch of fact-checking sites, PolitiFact, factcheck.org, and so on. But the moment that started, the opponents started their own sites. So Newsbusters and Red State and Breitbart.com, they had their own versions of fact-checking. So they also created their own think tanks. Romney, in one of the debates, said interestingly to Obama, now you cite a study, it was about tax policy. He said, there are 6 other studies that looked at the study you described, and they say it's completely wrong. So your studies, our studies, it doesn't matter, facts don't matter, truthiness prevails. Romney's chief pollster, Neil Newhouse, said this, oh, fact checkers come to this with their own sets of thoughts and beliefs, and we're not going to let our campaign be dictated by fact checkers. And they kept running these ads, which were given pants on fire or 5 Pinocchios by the fact checkers, but they didn't care because it didn't matter. There are some signs of hope. I'm going to just give you one, and then there's so much more to talk about. But just to give you something hopeful, in the New York Times in January of 2012, they have an ombudsman. It's supposed to be the reader's representative, and the ombudsman was deluged by complaints that the Times was letting Republican campaign operatives say things, and they just put them in the story without trying to find out if they were true or not. So the ombudsman writes a piece, and the headline is, "Should the Times be a truth vigilante?" And the lead was, I'm looking for reader input on whether and when New York Times news reporters should challenge, in quotes, facts that are asserted by newspapers that newsmakers they write about. Imagine that was an open question. And the hopeful is that in October of the same year, on the front page of the New York Times was a news story about Romney saying that Obama outsourced Jeep jobs to China. And the Times story said of the Romney car ads that at times they included statements that stretch or ignore the facts. Well, hallelujah, they were able to put that in a news story. Candy Crowley on the debate, she said, well, no, actually, sir, he did say. Martha Raddatz said to Paul Ryan, be specific, and the answer is, well, you're not being specific. Climate change is a hoax and a joke. On the other hand, that noted communist publication, Bloomberg Businessweek, took a stand, and the huge headline after Hurricane Sandy, it's global warming, stupid. And you have Amy Goodman, you have Bill Moyers, you have KSFR, you have Paul Krugman. There are people who are out there doing their best to do it. And one of the best is Craig Barnes. Would you join me, Craig? Great, thanks.
Raise your hand if you have any questions you want to get down.
I'm doing my Marco Rubio moment, grabbing the water. Thank you.
Yeah, give him a hand. You didn't answer the question whether democracy is over directly. You're getting pretty close.
If things go on this way, I mean, there are ways in which democracy is already over. There's a science fiction writer named William Gibson who coined the term cyberspace, and he said once something that I really found powerful. He said that the future is already here, it's just unevenly distributed. So I would say that there are pockets of democracy over that we have all witnessed. Yet, yes, it has happened, it's just unevenly distributed. And the question is whether there's a way to undo things like Citizens United and the deterioration of media and the ownership of campaigns by local TV news and so on.
One of the characteristics of the concentration of wealth and power that happens over and over again in history is that they become more and more insulated and isolated from the population from which they survive, which generates their income. And at some point, as that concentration gets tighter and tighter and fewer people participate in it, it gets top-heavy and the Russian Empire crumbles, or the Medici Empire crumbles, or the Greek Empire crumbles. There is a pattern in history of this concentration leading to the crumble. And I guess what we're looking for is a way to avoid, we really want the crumble, but we don't want all the pain and suffering and killing that usually goes with revolution. So that we're looking for, we're searching amongst the tools that we have in our possession and our understanding, ways to soften the blow. We really would like to have the plutocracy come apart. We really would like to have it come apart without a civil war. We'd like to have it come apart without AK-47s, but we just don't quite what the transition steps are if we're going to do it without AK-47. So in one way, it looks as if historically these changes, these revolutionary changes in consciousness have happened because of a collapsing economy, or from outside war, or from some change in culture that was unpredictable by the people in power. Do you see, here we have a condition now in which a land, in spite of all of the Koch brothers financed studies that say that global warming is a hoax, the seas don't lie, the glaciers are melting, the land is drying up, the forest fires in New Mexico have been horrendous. The land does not lie. Is there enough of an impulse in that non-lying land and in the collapse of the economy that keeps happening over and over again to break through and bring about this upswelling from underneath that you talked about of consciousness in spite of all of the overwhelming, what did you say, 1 million ads? Somehow something broke through. 1 million ads, and nevertheless, the wrong guy from their standpoint got elected. So what was it that broke through, and is it going to continue to break through now, or are we on a downward path from which there's no escape?
Well, it's a great question. Let me just back up to something, a couple things you said leading up to it, talking about whether some terrible disaster needs to happen in order to deal with our problems. Not necessarily. I mean, the banks might have been broken up. There were members of the Senate and staffers in Treasury who had all these plans for saying banks can only be this size and we'll reinstate this law and reinstate that law. And they could have gone in that direction. It's just that the money from the other side swamped them. So it took all the teeth out of the reform. So it could have gone a different way if we solved the money problem piece of it. We don't need to have violent, bloody revolution. What we need to have is the system we already have work. And that to me is the problem. It's the sand that's been thrown in the gears of a beautiful piece of clockwork that our founders gave us. Yes, it's a living thing and it needs to be renewed, but it's the stuff that our founders could not have anticipated, which makes the way in which it plays out now seem so hopeless.
One of the things that goes through our consciousness as we're watching this all unfold in front of us is that two questions. Let me start with the first one. When I grew up in rural Colorado, feeding sheep and chickens in the morning, I went to a 3-room country school, and we got the impression that the media and the press was on the side of the public, that it was an information source, that it was an analysis source, that it was the Fourth Estate, which was going to keep the Congress and the presidency honest. And we thought that Thomas Jefferson and Ben Franklin and all of us had that in mind, that the press. But the way you describe it, and I think brilliantly, Marty, just brilliantly, the way you describe it, the press, the media have now become tools of the plutocracy, or tools of the Congress, and not tools of the public. Would you say more about that?
Well, I think it's true. They're business. They're only about satisfying a market. The notion that they're serving a mission as a check on power, speaking truth to power, empowering the people who are the victims of power, all those things, or even just spreading basic information, those are now not part of their mission. There's nothing about that is of any interest to them unless it makes money. Now, let me, again, on the optimism front, in 2 weeks at my school, the judges for the Walter Cronkite Award for excellence in television political journalism are meeting again. My center, run this award for the Annenberg School. It's been given out since 2000. And many of the awards go to local TV news. And what we find, because we have these big competitions, is that all over the country, there are local TV stations and reporters who, against all odds, against all advice, are doing amazing things. And the way they do it is they take their skills in telling stories about crime, great narratives, gripping, compelling stuff, and try to apply those techniques to politics. I mean, after all, politics, drama, to people fighting each other, who's going to win. And so the Fourth Estate can figure out a way both to make money and to deliver something to the public which is other than simply return to shareholders. So it's not inevitable that the Fourth Estate behave that way, and occasionally I see pockets of goodness.
During the oppressions in the Soviet Union over the long 70-year period of the Soviet Union, there was an absolute monopoly power of the television and the press, and everything was censored, and everybody knew you couldn't get the news from that. We're getting closer and closer to that in this country. Underneath that was a kind of a correspondence of illegal private newspapers, and that people would type in their own living rooms and spread around. I had a friend who typed, she typed 10 copies of her, it was called a samizdat, means we made it ourselves in Russian. She typed 10 copies of her samizdat, and then she had 10 friends who got 10 copies of that samizdat, and then there were 10 friends who got 10. And she had a circulation that she knew about of 2,000. she had a 2,000 circulation in Leningrad, and Leningrad was the first city to hold elections which threw the Soviet power out in Leningrad. That kind of conversation was going on with conditions of great danger. We're not in that danger yet, and there must be some hope.
Well, and we do have, and I didn't talk about this, but I'm glad to take the prompt. That is that the internet has changed everything. Everyone is a publisher now. You can be a publisher of stupid things or smart things. But everyone right now can get the best news on the planet. Everyone online has access to, you name it, whatever you think of as the most useful, worthy, important, accurate information anywhere. That's never been true before. And that's why, you know, in China, they try to turn that stuff off. It's how Tahrir Square happened. And the people in Tunisia found out that a guy that set off the Arab Spring had immolated himself from the internet. They didn't know it from the news, but the internet is the news now. And so it contains an amazing amount of junk and of time-wasting stuff, and it's really hard for a lot of people, including myself, to tell the difference between those two things from time to time. But nevertheless, it is also the source of some of the most incredible entrepreneurial journalism, crowdsourced journalism. If you don't know the term crowdsourcing, there's a particular website called Talking Points Memo that made an amazing virtue of this. The government from time to time does a document dump. Something, you know, on a Friday afternoon, something embarrassing is going on, and they want to put out the stuff and just get rid of it. They'll put out 10,000 pages of something, which no reporter anywhere is going to be able to go through and do a story. And so instead, what Talking Points Memo did with its tens of thousands of subscribers is to say, okay, let's divide it up, and each of us will read 30 pages, and we'll see what's in there, and we'll post it online. And within 12 hours, there was a complete summary digest of everything in those 10,000 pages. Now, I'm getting some of these numbers wrong, but the idea counts. And so you can mobilize a crowd, a community, in ways that would be impossible. I mean, you have over 130 people now that you've put together in We're People Too. So you're doing that by, you know, house-to-house combat. But this can also be done in cyberspace and make global communities which do have a kind of political power. So that is encouraging.
There's an addition to that works right along with that point, and that is that each of us now, in the last 30 years, we've gone from typists to not only computer operators, but we have our own little printing press.
Mm-hmm.
A printer is a whole printing press. The King of England for 2,000 years would have loved to have it. Well, they weren't around that long, but they would have loved to have a printing press. We've all got printing presses. Every one of us got printing. So we all put pictures in it. We can all put, we can design. We can make them move and change. We can do all the things that used to cost thousands of dollars to get done, and we can do them individually. So that adds to, not only do we get to see it on the internet, but we can also send our friends with hard copies so they can make notes and carry it on.
And we all have movie studios.
Yeah.
The quality of cell phone cameras is equal to what very sophisticated, unbelievably large and expensive video cameras were not that many years ago. And the ability to edit, which would have taken a place this size, a post-production house, to figure out how to put the stuff together and do it, it's on a laptop. Anyone can do it now. So we're publishers, we're movie makers, we're artists and recording studios.
You know, I got a little nervous with my iPhone in my pocket when you were
Now
talking about
you know what they know.
And there's certain people who know everything I know, especially listening to my heartbeat. That's a little troublesome. But when I think about it, whether or not they're listening to everything, every one of us, all of these intelligent people in Santa Fe, and all the people that are carrying on smartphones all over the country and all over China, and they're trying to find who's thinking about what and who's thinking about throwing all over the country. It reminds me of the time when I was in the Soviet Union in Moscow in a big hotel. It was a 6,000-room hotel, and I went and checked in the hotel, got off the plane, long flight, tired, you know. Went into the bathroom. I was in a single room. Went into the bathroom and looked around. No soap. I had a couple of colleagues in the room next door, and I said to myself, standing in the bathroom, no soap. And the colleague, we got together with the colleagues, and then we went out to dinner, came back, and there was soap in my room. so you know, you're being listened to. But then I'm imagining, you know, there's 6,000 rooms. There's 6,000 guys sitting down there in the basement, all in one, listening to one room at a time. They're going nuts. They're going nuts, and there's no way they can keep it. Well, the CIA's got the same problem. You know, all of us are getting phones, but they can't keep it.
But actually not, because the National Security Agency, which does this number crunching and gets all of this data too, they now have the most powerful supercomputers ever imagined. And with those supercomputers, they don't have to listen to stuff.
No guys sitting
They
there.
have algorithms. They can crunch these numbers and spit out any number of amazing things that they didn't even know they were looking for, but once they find it, they say, oh, here's a pattern. So there are people to whom this data is served up, but the actual aggregating and slicing and dicing of that data is highly mechanized and very, very useful.
That brings to mind a concern that I think we all share, probably all in this room share, and that is that in this data explosion and this technology explosion, we're seeing a revisiting of what we used to mean by the rule of law. So they're listening to all of this stuff without a warrant. It used to give cause for concern. It's, everybody knows where I'm going, everybody knows what I've said, everybody, you know, if I can call Siri on this thing, Siri can listen without my call. So you know, I don't have to, I don't know when Siri's listening to me.
And your global positioning is always at all times known. So where you are.
That's right. Which is kind of spooky, you know. Kind of spooky, but given that fact that they know all of this all of the time, can we have some, you know, some of our legal scholars are beginning to say, as Mr. what was his name, Wu or Liu in the Bush administration and the Justice Department was saying, we don't have to. What was it? Which
You.
You was it? That was the one. Yeah.
Lou's a different guy. He's going to be the next.
That's right. Yes, thank you. Yeah. You, John Yu.
From Berkeley,
From Berkeley, yes. Thanks for
the one who did the torture memo.
thanks for California's help. These guys are pushing against habeas corpus, which we've had since 1215. They're pushing against search and seizure. They're pushing against torture limitations that we've had since at least the revolution. Is there, wherein, Marty, without knowing how the media helps with this, but wherein in your spirit as a human being, do you see those restrictions, those legal restrictions on what we do to each other and how we treat each other with fairness and truth-telling? Basic foundations of a democratic republic, truth-telling, absolutely foundational. All the advertising cuts against that. All the advertising says, every year, every car is new and legendary, as you said. New and every time, new and legendary, all new. They're not just new, they're all new. That's deception. That's not truth-telling. So what's happening in the, you are obviously a deeply sensible and sensitive and human being, not subject to all of this. Well, tortured by it, but not changed by it. Where are the roots of this basic humanity that we come with, that comes with the package, that's being drummed out of us by the media empires and the repetition? What are the sources that we can hope for, that we can rely on, that give us the reason for restraint in torture, that give us the reason for restraint in search and seizure, give us the reason for restraint in going to war? What are the sources of hope that you as a human being look to?
Well, I'll start with the place where you began, which has to do with surveillance. And everything seems to make that more and more possible. The most interesting development there, the biggest pushback, is coming from all places from Europe. The European Union, the European Commission, have mounted legal cases against Google, against Apple, against all these other sources, saying, wait a minute, you don't own this data, you can't take it, you can't monetize it, you can't make them do it. And they're putting in place new laws and new regulations for all of Europe, and these giant companies have to begin to take account of it, because as global companies, they can't have one set of rules here and one set of rules there. It's the most restrictive ones in democracies that they have to obey. So Google and Apple are running scared about what's happening in Europe. Maybe because their political system is not as tainted with money and media the way ours is, that they're able to actually do something in a thoughtful, sober way. As for the rest of it, I'm in the same boat as everybody else. You know, I was extremely hopeful and excited when Obama was elected in '08, and though I had my differences with him, I've learned to live with them. But this drones thing is very disturbing. It's extremely disturbing. And you know, I can say the arguments on both sides, but it doesn't make it not disturbing. So I think being a little bit heartbroken is probably the right place to be right now.
I suppose the traditional of these things, the traditional way this works its way out is that a false system or a system with a flaw at the heart gradually deteriorates and collapses or crumbles. That's the way the Mandarin Empire collapsed. That's the way the Soviet Empire collapsed.
You're just a bundle of cheer. I thought I was bleak.
We're all trying to make it crumble nicely in some gentle way. Well, let's see what we can do here. What's the best way, Marty, for this is extraordinary, and actually one of the sources of hope has to be stations like KSFR, places that are not yet under the umbrella of the larger system that can spawn independent inquiries and have people like you come and talk in places like this. And so there's that going on, and then there are all the people that you've mentioned that are talking about it. Paul Krugman, Bill Moyers, and Joe Stiglitz, and all the people like that are contributing, and you're doing this. Is there a coalition arising that's different? Is there not a coalition? Let me ask it this way. It's arising that's different than 10 years ago, different than 2008 even. There's a consciousness arising. Don't you think there's a change in consciousness?
There is, and let me do a commercial plug for an organization called Republic.us, which is attempting to be a coalition of all of these forces. And what they have decided to coalesce around is corruption. That's the term they use for the deterioration of democracy and what money and media have caused. And so Grover Norquist had his pledge. You know, if you don't sign the pledge, we will take our endorsement away. So Republic.us has its own pledge, and it's asking candidates to agree to support campaign finance reform and media reform and so on. And if they don't sign the pledge, they will raise money to defeat them. So there is a pushback on behalf of a broad coalition of people who have been involved in lots of grassroots democracy organizations.
And most of which, by definition, are unknown to the rest of us. We're all working independently,
Yes.
so that one of the things we don't know is that we don't have a unifying philosophy. They're socialists, they're Marxists, or somebody, but they're out there responding to the impulse of the human spirit that says this isn't good, and they're doing what they can do. Here's the question: what would happen if human society put collaboration and cooperation ahead of competition? Let me just add on to that a little bit. One of the generators of competition is a scarce philosophy about money. Money as a scarce object rather than money as a reward for service or labor. Money is controlled by banks. There's a scarcity there. But and that creates competition. That's one of the things. But take it a step further, who's telling the stories that grab hold of us about cooperation that don't just sound like roses and apples? Who's telling the stories that seem authentic and move us toward an understanding that at root, at bedrock, we are actually cooperative. We came in that way. That's the package. Who's telling the stories that you've seen in the film industry or seen in television, independent television, independent film? Who's telling the stories that were reawakening us that sense that, oh my God, that's who I am.
Well-
I'm not just the slice and dicer. I'm something else.
Let me give a counterintuitive answer to that. I think the best stories about the importance of collaboration and cooperation are coming from the private sector, from experiments in business, because businesses have figured out that the only way they can address the problems they are facing is by forging the most amazing disparate collaborations. That you can't be just in one business, you can't just, if in a university, you can't just be this discipline or that discipline. There's no problem that, or opportunity that can be solved anymore without collaboration between the public sector, the private sector, state, local. It's just the way it is, and there are examples of why that is and when that's happened. And so, you know, the Harvard Business Review is running stories about why collaboration is the secret to your bottom line. So in this case, ironically, I think business is leading us to, rather than the kind of humanistic perspective of only the business sector only brings competition, scarcity, and it's our more humane nature that will restore a sense of balance.
The corporate enterprise rewards that bottom line, and the bottom line does not usually include taking care of the community, taking care of the water, taking care of the air, the water, the sky that's outside of our mandate. I can see how that collaborative, cooperative effort makes for better corporations, better running within the corporation. But until the bottom line also includes respect for community health and education and air and water and land, can we look to that source for help, or can we,
Well,
where else do we go?
I think there is a fragile, nascent, broad movement of corporate social responsibility that has brought enough pressure on enough corporations that there are some examples of companies deciding that it is in their self-interest to be seen in their communities as being helpful, not just to be seen, but actually be helpful. So I think it is happening. We all know about the situations in which that's not the case, but my friend John was telling me about an idea in which water, the way in which a company like Coca-Cola might be seen to be using too much water, but if they set up a system of of credits in which for every liter of water they use here, they have invested to get 20 liters of water purified over there, just as trading carbon credits, and that will help them in their foreign markets they want to be in. So this is an experiment, this is an idea, there are things like that going on, and it does involve actual service to communities as a way of achieving their bottom line.
One of the limitations that I heard about on my program this morning was that we get hit by billions of bits of information every day, and we only can make 2,000 thoughts. So we get from the billions of things that are going on out there, we only get 2,000 thoughts. So we actually don't know about all these things, and I don't know about all those businesses doing all those good things. So that's why we're getting that problem. Maybe we don't know them.
And I must say that I'm not sure all those 2,000 thoughts are particularly good for us. In Buddhism, the term for what goes on in our heads is monkey mind. And it kind of makes sense that we're always being distracted and going from thing to thing. We are also telling our own stories, which I find really interesting and useful. We are the narrators of the stories of our life, and we're always incorporating new data and say, oh, this is where we began, and this is where we're headed. We're adjusting to take into account what's going on. And I think those kinds of thoughts, which are kind of below the level of a rational thought. We're telling our stories to ourselves. We can't help it. It's our unconscious that's taking all this stuff and coming up with a new story. I think that stuff's very helpful, but I'm not sure how much of the 2,000 is really of use to us.
Somebody's asked about Fox News, what can be done about Fox News, and I'm thinking of putting that in a larger context of there are about 6 major. The word of the last time I looked, about 6 major combines, media combines. Viacom and Disney and Fox or the News Corporation and Barton Bertelsmann, those guys. If there are only 6, and Fox can keep getting bigger and bigger, and at some count I heard that they have the 15 first listened to programs, the 15 most listened to programs are on Fox. I don't know whether that's true or not, but some statistics sticks on them. If everybody's listening to Fox, and Fox is getting its news straight from the White House, as it did during the Bush administration, what can be done to combat that? What about the breakup of the monopolization of the media empires?
I would be delighted if there were political pressure on media conglomerates, just as I would be delighted if there were political pressure on the financial industry in order to make these things smaller and accountable. Given the people who have to do that, namely the members of Congress who are so dependent on the money from those very corporations in order that they give the money back to them to make the money from airing their ads, it's a vicious circle. And I don't see, without a change in the system, without making ads free, for example, free airtime for candidates, without fundamental changes like that, I don't see that happening. On the other hand, I think it's important not to inflate Rupert Murdoch. 2 million people watch Fox. 2 million people, Fox News. That's 2 million people. Maybe, on some great nights, 3 or 4, but that's what it is. CNN, poor struggling CNN, many of their shows are watched by 300,000 people in the whole country. So we don't have a proportionate sense of what power people have. It becomes disproportionate when we give it to them, and when every bar or airport or congressional office has that stuff up there and they care about that. But in truth, there are a lot of people living lives in which that's not as relevant as we empower them with.
Great point. Somebody has asked about journalism schools. Are journalism schools, I'm going to put it a little differently than the person who asked the question, are journalism schools turning out radicals that will ask the tough questions?
I think their first obligation is to turn out people whose investment in big tuition turns into a job. I mean, it's an industry whose business model has so deteriorated that their first thing to do is not to train them to be, horseshoe repairers. And from the perspective of my school, our journalism applicant number is rising, and it could be because our curriculum runs across all the platforms. You can't any longer just learn how to be a print journalist or a broadcast journalist or whatever. You have to learn everything. And so the equipping of people with these skills to go into a marketplace, and who knows what it's going to be like 2, 3, 5, 10 years from now. Whether those people in turn are radicals, they're questioning authority, I think it's the usual bell curve. And here's hoping that there are enough of them who have the same kind of spirit that you all here have and the listeners have, that also is the case for people who choose journalism as their careers.
Let's end with one of the questions is democracy over? If it is, what's next? And let's talk a little bit about, let's give people the courage to walk out of a room.
I think that if enough people are angry enough, that change through the democratic process is possible. So I don't think we have to water the revolution with the blood of patriots, as people on the right are saying. I think what we have to do is realize how many of us feel this way, recognize each other, build community, not just locally, but locally is important, but also nationally and globally, and come to understand that we have as much power as we choose to wield, and go out and wield it.
Thank you, Marty Kaplan, for coming to Santa Clara.
What a pair. Let's also remember that Craig will be on the radio every Saturday morning at 9 a.m. And also, we did have a sign-in table. If any of you are not members and would like to be, we'll catch you on the way out. Okay? Thanks so much to all of you for showing up tonight. It was a special.